Hi, I'm Drew Barrymore of The Drew Barrymore Show. That's what it says, I should say. But really, I'm just the biggest fan ever. And I jumped at the opportunity to be the moderator of a show that honestly was the very antidote to everything that we all needed so much, this life force, this joy, this romance, this perfect encapsulation of how you can bridge period and modernity so brilliant. And this series was watched globally by more than 82 million households. So that should tell you everything about how everybody clamored onto this. And it also was the most groundbreaking, record-breaking debut in Netflix history. Right now, we have our esteemed showrunner and executive producer, Chris Van Dusen. We have, thank you again. We have Reggae Jean Page. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance again, Reggae.
Lovely to see you again.
Who plays the Duke Simon Bassett. We have Phoebe Deniver, who it is also a pleasure to make your acquaintance again, Phoebe, who plays Daphne Bridgerton. Nicola Coughlan, who plays Penelope Featherton. Ajwa Ondo, who plays Lady Danbury, who just, oh my goodness. Golda Rochevelle as Queen Charlotte.
Thank you. In the house.
And Claudia Duffy, who plays Eloise Bridgerton so beautifully. And my goodness, are you dressed to kill today? And director Tom Barrick.
Hello.
Thank you for allowing me into this club. I'm always nervous, even though I've grown up in this industry, to visit other people's sets. It feels so weird. Like I could be in the Sahara, and if someone was like, "Would you like a water?" I'm like, "No, I'm fine." I'm so nervous on other people's sets. I could have cotton mouth in the Sahara, and I will literally act like I need nothing. And right now, it's exciting to be emboldened to be involved in a world where I've been such a voyeur and a fan. And celebrating your show on our show, it's like we have a news segment, which Phoebe and Reggae so kindly joined. And we've been talking about this show incessantly because it lives on and it is not a one-hit wonder. This is something that will stand the test of time. And we're so excited that it will be moving forward. The season 2 announcement was equal life affirming to us all. We need this. We're on the Bridgerton feeder. I just want to know that this show came from a series of books by Julia Quinn. That wasn't something I knew when I first started watching it. I knew that it came from you and Shonda Rhimes, and this was her first foray to delivering her promise with her Netflix deal. And drop that mic. I think you guys did that real service. Setting the bar impossibly high for anyone else. Did you, in picking this material, in finding it, in creating it with her, did you have an instinct that it would be this big? Or did you feel like, oh gosh, I hope? Or did you have an instinct?
I think you always hope. I mean, I don't think any of us expected this level of response. I certainly can't tell you I did. I mean, you always hope that people will find and fall in love with your show, but I could not have anticipated this. I mean, the tweets, the memes, the recaps, the Bridgerton musical on TikTok, it's all been incredibly exciting and also a little surreal at the same time, but only in the best way possible.
I'd like to ask you and Tom also, I've done period movies myself. And as a viewer, I have this, I'm going to just make it personal and talk about a film called Ever After, which I met with multiple filmmakers, and some would be like, it's got to be dark, darling. And I was like, whoa, no, it doesn't. The world is dark enough. We need to escape that darkism. Or they'd be like, let's modernize this shit. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, that's so disrespectful to the period. No, there is a way to, as a filmmaker, have an amalgamation of period that becomes timeless and yet modern, not stiff. How did you guys talk and approach about, I mean, you've got Regency core popping up in fashion trends, like everybody has hooked in. You picked the Vitamin String Quartet, but what were some of the other choices where you said, we're going to make period the hottest thing ever without disrespecting the period?
I think for me, that's really what got me excited, truly excited about adapting the books. You know, it was this chance to really create the period show that I've always wanted to see. And by that, I mean, it was one that wasn't going to ever look or feel like any period show that I've seen before. And I think a lot of people, myself included, used to think that period pieces had to lean more traditional and more conservative, but I was never really interested in that. Really early on, I think when developing the show, I knew that this was not going to be a period show for your grandparents. This was going to be fresh and exciting and especially relatable to a modern audience. You know, the show is really meant to be a big, bold, steamy, reimagined Regency love story. And that's truly what we set out to make.
I love the details like Audrey Hepburn in War and Peace and Vitamin String Quartet, bringing a needle drop aspect to the orchestral, you know, score. Those are such unique, intelligent choices that do bring a modern audience in. And Tom, you know, when you're working with the actors, are you giving certain direction of, well, this would be anachronistic, this would be a way to put a spin on this period and keep it crisp? But how did you talk to them about performance that would feel authentic to the time, but again, not stiff and period? I think of even the corset that the same guy works with, Terry Mugler. I mean, these are brilliant, brilliant, brilliant choices. So as a director to actors, what was your approach of like boundaries, and where was freedom and license taken?
Well, it's a great question. First, I think this palette of actors right here, you couldn't ask for a better ensemble of people who are really willing and bringing their A game to it. So that was at the beginning. To have that as a starting point, you're very lucky as a director to have that. But I think a lot of the discussions with Chris about kind of what he desired, what he wanted, and bringing that, it wasn't sort of one simple element that says, we're just going to make this very different. There were numerous specific things, and with each of these actors right here, I think we're all used to sort of what period is and what the cadence to those things. So we switched up rhythms a lot, and not just simply just pacing it up, but really kind of changing the cadence of how we usually hear those things and twisting it and putting a little spin on it. And if it's a slight bit of direction as to attitude, I think it you know, sometimes took people out of their comfort zone a little bit, because there was such a rhythm that we're all used to hearing a thing, and really just taking chances and risks and playing. And by taking, you know, talking and collaborating with and trying different things, I think we stumbled on some things that really kind of brought that freshness to it, as well as being, from a director standpoint, being more dynamic with the camera and really kind of getting into the point of view of the character of that particular scene and what's happening from them. That gave us permission to really delve into worlds that wasn't just the classic, you know, we had our very cinematic approach to it, but really diving into the character's point of view about how and what's happening in the scene, and letting that dictate how we move the camera, what lenses we choose.
Yeah.
And then of course, music. I mean, in a very, you know, very simple way. There was one scene I recall with Phoebe and Reggae, as we were dancing, we had sort of a song that we had that was prepared, and we had this repertoire of different songs, and we just tried and experimented with very current songs, putting it in there, and it just struck an energy with everyone. I remember Adjoa just sort of bopping to something that gave it a little bit of a subtle thing that showed the enthusiasm and the hearing of the music, and then you put classical to it, but that was really kind of what it was at the time that gave it that little subtle moment of a modern twist, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump on that for a sec, I think what you were saying about disrespecting the period, what comes through on the actor's side from that kind of direction is, I think what's disrespectful to the period is limiting it, because people have always been people. Like the fullness of our humanity has always been the fullness of our humanity, no matter what century we're in. And so I think what we do is we impose a certain lens or a certain filter over everything we do in the past, because pasty people felt like this. And it's like, we've always been happy. We've always been miserable. We've always been joyful. We've always had trial. And it is expanding the lens that respects the period, whereas limiting it to this idea, I think that's the imposition. I think we have previously imposed certain boundaries on the period that simply don't exist in real life. And expanding that and allowing the humans to be more human, allowing the world to be more of the world, is releasing the period. I think it releases a truth and a depth that we've simply been denying ourselves, as opposed to us imposing anything, is how that felt on the other side of that lens.
And I think I was reading something, maybe it was with Claudia and Nicola, about how people used to lay around. They weren't always sitting like this, you know, and just to bring that element in. I guess what I sort of balk at a little bit as an audience member is when I hear modern needle drops sometimes on period pieces. I'm like, you couldn't find a way to bridge it. So you're going to go kind of to that arch thing to bring it into the current, but that's not it. What you just talked about, Reggae, is the humanity, the mannerisms, the experience of the human condition that is timeless. And that's the timelessness. And that's anything but lazy. It's tapping into such an intelligence. We are all looking to have this communal experience, this collective experience. And, you know, when you put those type of wardrobes on it, it just makes it more fabulous and it just works. Now, Phoebe, one thing that I felt you were saddled with in the best way, and you made such a brilliant choice, and all of you did collectively, because there's no I in team, but we all have our duties to fulfill together and do our part in the orchestra. You know, we're living in a modern time where the emphatic nature to get married has been really dated, destroyed, and like extinguished. We are now women who will decide what we want, when we want it. And somehow you manage to bring the yearning and the needing of these securities and traditions that didn't feel arch or cliched. I was so with you. We were all so with you on that journey. And I mean, of course, it's such a woman's, you know, oh, he's not this way. He hasn't met me yet. Don't worry. I'll work on that boy. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
How did you say, I'm not going to make this a dated thing that doesn't feel in keeping with the empowerment of the modern woman, but take the modern woman back into something we've all wanted, which is to be with the one we love and not compromise? And I mean, you had so many layers. How did you approach that?
I think my way in for Daphne, as I mean, you know, as a woman that is very independent and doesn't think like a woman like Daphne did, my way in was like, all I've wanted my entire life and all I've worked for is to be an actor. I've always known that I wanted to do it. I think I've been very fortunate in that respect, that I've sort of from a very young age was like, I really want to act. That's all I want to do. And I think Daphne feels the same, but it's just about marriage. Like that's genuinely all she wants. And she's quite naive to it in a way, because she doesn't understand what marriage is or what love is, or so we're learning this with her, really. But I think the great thing, and a lot of it was in the writing, is that it's something she really yearns for, but it's all on her terms in a way. You know, she never lets anyone push her into doing something she doesn't want to do, into loving someone she doesn't love. It's you know, she wants to find love and she wants to be happy and she wants to do it on her own terms. And that in itself is a feminist way of thinking. And although, you know, Eloise is obviously the obvious feminist, it's not that Daphne isn't a feminist. She's just born in a time where this was an obvious choice for women, and the only choice for a woman, really.
But you're talking about passion and knowing yourself. And it's true. Claudia comes at it with a modern approach in a different way, and yet both feel so extremely relevant. Reggae and Ajwa, your relationship in the show, you know, so many times, whether it was like in a Western or like, you know, even an 80s movie, back to period pieces, like men who were the unattainable, boy, was there a disservice of a little bit of a single note to them. You know, we loved them because they were so unattainable, and we didn't understand them in that mystery. The truth is, women hate mystery. Ambiguity kills our soul. We want to know everything. We never shut up to get to the bottom of it all. And I thought your character, especially with Ajwa's help, you brought so much of this backstory and what makes us who we are. And I loved that, Chris, that these books, that all of that was there, because it was so not typical of your unattainability came from your childhood damage that is illustrated so intriguingly and woven so beautifully, where it keeps you on your edge of your seat through the story. How did you guys map that out together? And did you know, how did you guys talk about that both together and individually?
I think that the biggest part of that is that no man is an island. And I think the idea of these archetypes we've seen before is that we've tried to reinforce their own self-mythology, that they are self-made men and men who exist entirely by their own rules, which is, of course, never true. Behind every great man, there is their family, there are women. I think what we've been missing out of those stories is women. We've been missing out who raised these folks, who they look up to, who keeps people honest. And that, in every sense, is Lady Danbury in this story. And so I think, again, the theme is you simply widen the lens, bring in a more total version of the story, which includes the humans who support you and raise you and pull you up and smack you on the knee with their cane when you're not paying attention. That's how you make both my character more full and the world more full, and every way that we see the world more full through essentially the wonderful work of Adjoa Andoh, is what I'm saying.
I suppose, Drew, for me, I think it's always about relationship, isn't it? What I'm always interested with characters is, can you feel the weight of their history when you see a little blink of them? You know, because that's, you have to know you have to feel a whole person. And I think the lovely thing that Chris gave Reggae and I was the opportunity to flex some of that history and to bring some of that weight into the conversation. And so, as we do with all families, you know, we're the product of our older generations, for good and for ill. So all the wariness and all the wisdoms and all the wit and the humour and the struggle that Lady Danbury carries, she sort of infected Simon with it at some level to sort of counter other pushes that are coming into his life, the things that make him defensive, untrusting, and scared, basically. You know, fear and anger is just fear turned outwards. I know it's a cliche, but I sort of feel that tension is always there. I think for me, sometimes the love you give is tough love, because there's no point pushing children into the world and saying it's going to be bunnies and flowers, because experience tells you it will be bunnies and flowers, but it will also be a kick up the arse and other stuff as well. And you need to have your responses ready to cope with these situations. And I kind of feel that's what Lady Danbury wants to do with Simon. She loves the fact that he's gorgeous. She loves the fact that he's sought after. They both like a nice bit of schmutter. You know, they want to look stush and they want to be good and all that. But it's about, you know, enjoy the world, swamp it up, enjoy it, relish it, but also be prepared for how you're going to respond to its knockbacks, and try and do it in a graceful, gracious way when you can. Don't make yourself less than you are. I think that's a big thing for Lady Danbury. Be the whole of, take it all, the good and the bad, and do something with it and be something with it.
God, you should be a therapist. And Golda, what was your mental wherewithal to become this commanding presence that was stylish and interesting and layered and lonely and just into the gossip like everybody else, which almost brought you down to everyone else's level? And yet you stayed above like the grand matriarch of the whole thing, changing a wig in every single scene, by the way.
Yeah.
I was always waiting to see what you would look like.
Came to snatch him.
Wearing next. I think I channeled my mother on most of those occasions. Yeah, she was definitely the matriarch of our family, but also I think empathy and truth and just heart as well, you know, wonderful scripts. And as everybody is saying, you know, having wonderful people to work off, a really great ensemble. And I think that's the one thing I really love about Bridgerton, is that we are an ensemble, but yet we all hold our single journeys, our single lanes within that ensemble. You know, you never get, you know, different kind of energies happening. It's all one creative ensemble energy that's being channeled through, you know.
Did you, if you channeled your mom for sort of the intimidating matriarch, you know, person who chews up the scenery?
I think wit as well. My mum had a lot of wit, dry humor, yeah, as well as being a very proper woman.
What did you channel to allow this commanding presence, this wit, this bigger than life character to just fall prey to the curiosity like everybody else?
I think she's human,
as
everybody else is, you know, desperate for some kind of distraction from her own life, which behind closed doors is quite desperate and sad, but also loving and, you know, positive in a weird way. They both love each other very, very much, the king and queen. But I think because of that, there is a need for escapism, a need for connection, a need for the female, the strength of female.
I do feel like you played it so well that it was just all of it's on your shoulders right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in that mystery, I have to kick it up to the ladies. Who is it true that you have a pre-existing friendship?
I freaked out, Claudia, in that I had forgotten I had done this genuinely. But when I auditioned for the show, I started reading the books and I was like, who is Eloise going to be? That's going to be like the biggest thing. And I had met Claudia once briefly at a party and fell in love with her because it's impossible not to, because she is sunshine personified. And then when I found out it was her, I was like so happy and so excited that I then went, this is so creepy, I went to her friends on Instagram because she doesn't have social media. And I was like, I'm going to be playing Claudia Jesse's best friend. Like, I don't know if anyone told you, but I was like so keen to like get into your life. And she's just so
They were very polite. They didn't want me to be like, well, a bit too much, actually. Going to spend a lot of months with her.
I mean, yeah, it was a lot, but like, Claudia is just so wonderful to work with. And I think, you know, like Reggae and like Adjo were saying, in an ensemble like this, that they make you better. When you work with good actors, it pushes you to like be on your A game, and working with someone like Claudia who just can do so much with just like a movement of her eye. It's just like, you know, I want to be as good as her.
I think that, you know, it is a mystery amongst the romance and the eye candy and the ensemble. We're all like, what, who, how, when's the next one coming out? Who is it? What? That was sort of a not expected genre for me in this piece. Was the Agatha Christie, who done it? Who is it? When am I going to find out? I'm on the edge of my seat. I think I know who it is. I've got it pegged. Wait, you know what? Nope, there was something in there that made me now go to that person. And that's such a fun thing to do in a show and pull it off so well, which is like, all the different theories that you can have, and knowing what you both knew, how did that affect, you know, just like Ajua and Reggae, how did you guys look at the board vision of your journey, knowing where you start and where you finish in season 1? How did you make that plan? Because you both had a lot of work on your hands for giving tells and yet pulling them away and fooling, like over and over and over, not just between each other and for yourselves, but to others. How did you do it?
We talked about it a lot, and Claudia was really helpful in that I would sometimes the things that Penelope would do, how duplicitous she was, I would, you know, I think as an actor, you're always like, well, I wouldn't do this, but the character's doing it. So how do I follow that through line of thought, and how is it justified for her to do it? And Claudia said, well, she's really young. And I think that's the thing that we had to think about, like, to remind ourselves that they're 17, but they're also 17, 18, 13. The rules are very different then, and they had no agency. They had no control over their lives. They, you know, they don't know what sex is. They're so innocent. And I think for me, it was definitely a constant thing that I would think Penelope has to compartmentalize so much. And I think she's done that because of how her family sort of mistreat her and how society overlooks her. But it's a fascinating contradiction. Her whole life is that she's the least, you know, people pay no attention to her, but then she's the highest status person in any room she's in, as well as being the most low status person. So that was fascinating to play, and also a character that doesn't, like Reggae was saying, hold back, doesn't let it all out. Because when I have a problem, I'm straight on the phone to my friend, I have to say everything and analyze everything. Penelope doesn't do that. Penelope just keeps it in. So it was an amazing challenge to play her.
Well, you're a puppet master, and Reggae, I feel like you're trying to cut the strings, and Phoebe's trying to, like, you know, bandage it all back together, you know, and everybody has this great role. And I thought, Claudia, you were so delightful, and the way you were just a ray of sunshine and a ray of, like, representing us all, trying to figure it out and playing everyone, but not unwell intended. And I loved your staunch feminist way, and, you know, not wanting to fall prey to what you thought was expected of you, which I just thought was, you know, that's the thing where I was asking Phoebe, you know, you are a roadmap into where society's going to go for women.
I think, like, I'm so aware that I'm repeating myself so much, but that's the nature of the beast, I guess. But it's worth saying again. I think Eloise, you can see all the characters really, the younger characters, the internal turmoil, and how they find it very difficult to vocalize those things, whereas Eloise does not struggle with that. she will say her thoughts, you know, they'll come out of her mouth. I feel like she's just the one that's holding the megaphone, because actually, you know, you can see it, again, I say this all the time, but you can see it with the boys, with them sort of fighting, you know, resisting their responsibilities that are due for them, and, you know, in the future, the responsibility of a dukedom and stuff. And I feel like Eloise she's the explicit voice of that, but I think the beauty of the piece is that it's peppered throughout, that you can see how the patriarchy isn't working for anyone, even the people it really looks like it's working for, because it's making them go mad. So, you know, I think whilst it was an honor to be the one who was like, duh, like, I think if you watch it again, which many people have, which I'm very touched by, see it a bit more, so you can see that it's really, really peppered throughout. But you know, Eloise is the one holding the megaphone, I guess.
Absolutely. And a roadmap to female empowerment to come. Now, I want to start this with Phoebe and Reggae, and then kick it over to Chris and Tom, because I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, you know, we could call it romance, we could call it passion, we could call it sex, we can call it whatever it is. But Phoebe and Reggae, what kind of agreement did you guys make with each other to have sex be at the forefront and yet not be the thing that made us care or watch. I mean, sure, a lot of people watched it for that, don't get me wrong, but you negated a cliche. And this is why I want to ask Chris and Tom this, because you had a real responsibility as filmmakers not to let this go into a tawdry genre and be this amazing show of what it is, and yet really go for it and not hold back. So that's a fine line. You guys walked it perfectly. What was your agreement and communication of how you could be vulnerable with each other, show everybody this stuff, go for it, but remain these characters and human beings that were still classy and sophisticated and whole people, and that didn't overshadow who you were?
Because classy, sophisticated, whole people have sex. Sorry.
Right.
It's true. I mean, I say this all the time, but honestly, our dance rehearsals were so instructive for that, because the whole thing with Daphne and Simon is that it's all kind of a dance. Like there's a push and there's a pull and there's a rhythm to their dynamic, and we really were able to set that up with our amazing choreographer from very early on. And also it was really lovely because it felt like me and Reggae were both in it together in a sense, because we were learning this new dance together and we were both unsure of how it was going to go. So forming that relationship very early on of like this dynamic was really lovely, and just made it about, you know, their entire journey. And obviously the intimate scenes are, you know, a big part of the show, but they informed both the characters' storylines and their journey, and I think that they were really important to the dynamic and that again the routine of them dancing. And yeah, I felt like that was very informative.
It's interesting that you use that metaphor, because you think of the history of music and how many times the word dancing has been a euphemism for sex. And I think one of the reasons that is because it's societally appropriate to say, let's dance, when really we mean,
let's get to it.
You know?
Yeah, and that was the way of, you know, that was all they could do back in those days. That was how they romanced. They went to these balls and they danced together. And until they were married, that was like as far as it was going to go. So that was the sexiest thing ever, you know?
Oh yeah, and I think Reggae, you said it. People were doing it, and it's that kind of confidence and relaxed nature that we all like let you take the lead, and we were like, okay, good, thank you, you're right. We're all
Yeah, but even like when Chris was like, it's not for your grandparents, it's like, how do you think we got here? They know. Do you know what I mean? But there's an element of, you were talking about the agreement with each other. It's an agreement with each other. You were saying about not holding back. You hold each other instead of holding back. You know, we were looking out for each other the whole time and kind of supporting each other. But also it's an agreement as much with Chris and Tom and the script. It's an agreement that these are scenes, and instead of, there is still language. We're not using words, but there is still an explicit and specific language at all times. And you talk about, Phoebe and I would constantly talk about what's happening in this scene. Why is it at this rhythm? Why is it in this shape? Why are they doing this in this order? And how have we changed by the end of the scene? And that's no different from any other scene where we're speaking. We're just speaking a different language with our bodies instead of our words. And in that way, the intimacy scenes were almost identical to the dance scenes. They had the same language in that way.
Well, I think the Harlequin romance novels and the whole entire genre, I believe, has had, forgive me if I'm wrong on this stat, a giant boost in sales. And there has been plenty, you know, attributing to this show. But I think as filmmakers, it's like, sometimes I think, and it's going to sound weird, but like a horror movie where you're like, how do you create that tension and fear? Or a sports film where you're like, you got to make that thing. Ah! It's like you do that with sex. By the way, many positions, I will say, really important. You don't need to
Yeah, but to give Tom his props, the first position is that scene in the gallery where like you're just inching your fingers towards each other. Like you don't, the way you create tension in a horror movie is you don't reveal the monster, you know, until as late as possible. The first time that you have that intimacy scene, I remember standing there next to Phoebe and our arms are down beneath us and we're not allowed to look. And I'm like, is this ever going to read? Like, what's this going to be like on a screen? And then Tom knocked it out the park, because that is by far one of the most intimate scenes in the entire series. And it's just these hands slowly moving towards each other. And when you get that first touch of skin, it's electric. And how we pulled off that magic trick, I still don't know, but it's a gorgeous magic trick.
It's a testament to great filmmaking and great acting. And I think the show epitomizes that. It's the highest form of. I couldn't love it more. I wish you all the best of luck. I hope anyone who's watching this has truly gotten lost. And yet through this conversation, there's so much to be found about ourselves and our relationships and our past and where we're all headed. It's got mystery, it's got romance, it's got great music, most beautiful production design. We didn't even talk about the wigs and the costume. 7,500 individual pieces made from scratch. You didn't even buy furniture from a prop house. You built it all. This is a true groundbreaking endeavor, and it shows in every single detail. And for the people who are not a part of this panel, they contributed brilliantly to this too. And I understand one of them will be one of a carrying storyline into season 2. And just thank God there is one, because we can't live without this. But let this be recognized and acknowledged accordingly to all the effort, detail, and beauty that went into it. All of your hearts and souls are in it. And I thank you so much for letting me be a part of this panel. And thank you to Netflix for asking me. I guess my like psycho fandom comes through, and I thought why they associated me with it, because this was not a random pick. I have been carrying the torch for this show because I know how hard these things are to pull off. And you didn't compromise on one thing. Well done. Thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. I love you guys so much. Oh my God. Oh my God. I literally got into a world that's my fantasy. Thank you for letting me be a part of this reality. Best of luck. Nobody deserves it more. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.